There was something about the photograph. Nobody knows quite what it is, except that it's guys doing some work, raising a pole, and nobody's looking into the camera or doing any of the kind of things you would do on a pose kind of situation. But it just sort of symbolized the effort of the war effort. 3 of the 6 men were killed. And then these other guys were taken out of the war and sent back to work in the States. Kind of just interested to find out how they got there and what happened to them. Obviously, the bond tour didn't help 2 of their lives. It left them rather confused. 2 of the men didn't have very good success, and 1 did, which is John Bradley, who the story's about because it's written by James, his son.
Growing up, we knew that my dad raised the flag, but that's all we knew because he wouldn't talk about it. When I was in 3rd grade, my teacher called my dad a hero, asked him to speak at my class. My dad came home that night. I said, "My teacher says you're a hero. She wants you to talk, Dad." And he said, "I can't talk because I forgot everything." That was often his excuse. And then he looked at me and he said, "Your teacher said something about heroes." Well, I got excited thinking he was going to tell me some juicy stories, but he just looked in my eyes and he said to me, "I want you to always remember that the heroes of Iwo Jima are the guys who didn't come back." My father never talked about Iwo Jima, and then after he died, we found 3 cardboard boxes stuffed with Iwo Jima memories. At the bottom of one box was a letter that he had written home from Iwo Jima 3 days after the flag raising. In that letter, which was a letter that he wrote to his mom and dad in Appleton, Wisconsin, he wrote, "I had a little to do with raising the American flag, and it was the happiest moment of my life." I cried when I read that letter, wondering why he had never been able to share that happy moment with me, a son. So I didn't set out to write a book. I set out to find out the answer to this question. Why didn't my dad talk about Iwo Jima? I didn't know. Obviously, his life was affected by being in the shadow of that photograph. Well, he's in the middle of a photograph and there's other guys around him. So I began to question the other families. What was their experience? How did the photograph affect their lives? And how did their brothers or sisters or whatever know my father? I wanted to know a little more about those relationships. As I talked to these different family members, the stories that were coming over the phone were so incredible that one morning I realized, I've got to write a book. This has got to be written down. I discovered a completely different side of my father. I mean, really my father's history and my family started when he married my mother. That was after the war. He never told her anything. So the research I was doing pre-marriage about him on Iwo Jima, him on the bond tour, was totally unknown to his wife that he was married to for 47 years. I'm the one who told my mother about my father's experiences on Iwo Jima, if you can imagine. So every day was a day of discovery. I was going day by day, tracking my father across the island of Iwo Jima, on the bond tour, meeting the president. So every day was an exciting day to find out more about my dad. People ask me if I found out why my dad didn't talk about Iwo Jima. I think I know now. My dad had a lot not to talk about. On Iwo Jima, if I was advancing with another Marine and that Marine was shot, I was supposed to keep on going. I often didn't see the casualty. My father was a corpsman. His job was to turn towards the casualty, was to go towards the worst, to embrace those guys whose blood was draining into the sands of Iwo Jima. Hour after hour, day after day, he only saw the worst. My father cried in his sleep for 5 years after he was married. I asked my mother, what does that mean, cry in his sleep? I never saw anybody cry in their sleep. She said he would be shaking and the tears would be coming out of his eyes and he'd be groaning and shaking at night. My dad had a lot not to talk about. It was very emotional researching the flag raisers. Of course, the easiest one was my father. I knew him and could get the information. Rene Gagnon was someone who I was aware of in my childhood. My dad exchanged Christmas cards with him. The story of Ira Hayes is pretty well known, and I made friends with his people on the reservation in Arizona. The most gratifying research to do was the research of the 3 guys who died on Iwo Jima, because all they had was their boyhoods. Mike Strank was called the Old Man, Sergeant Mike, and they called him the Old Man because he was pretty advanced in age. He was already 24 years old. I mean, Franklin Sousley died on Iwo Jima at the age of 19, buried along with 6,824 American boys, almost 22,000 Japanese boys. Harlem Block, 22 years old. All he had was a childhood, really. The stories from the families were just so emotional. The story of Belle Block recognizing the backside of her son. If you look at the photo, you can't figure out who that is. Belle Block says immediately, "That's my son." She's challenged by her family, by the entire nation. She never gives up. She says, "That's him. That's definitely him." And 2 years later, Congress investigates, and they're able to determine that it's true that Belle did know her boy. Hearing about Mrs. Strank, she gets the telegram that her oldest boy is not coming back, that he's a casualty on Iwo Jima. She faints dead away on the kitchen floor. At that moment, if you looked at Mrs. Strank in her Pennsylvania kitchen, that was a 45-year-old woman with black hair. Within 3 months, that hair was white. Goldie Sousley gets a telegram that Franklin Sousley, her oldest son, will not be coming back, dead on Iwo Jima at the age of 19. I heard a story down in Kentucky, where Goldie's from, that when she got the telegram, the neighbors could hear her scream all night and into the morning. I went down to Kentucky and did a little more research, and that's when I realized the neighbors lived a quarter of a mile away. It was very difficult to write about the battle. I was listening on the telephone to guys who were there, guys who were still crying about dead buddies. Iwo Jima was a massacre on both sides, Japanese and American sides. You're talking about a 5-mile-long island with almost 30,000 dead. The Battle of Iwo Jima represented a new high or low, however you want to put it, in terms of casualties. More casualties in one day, the invasion day on Iwo Jima, than 2 months of Guadalcanal. Americans weren't used to this. It was a bloodbath, a slaughter. But you know what it took to win the Battle of Iwo Jima? Iwo Jima is still today America's most decorated moment. We stamped out more medals for American bravery for action on Iwo Jima than any other action in the history of the United States. Now, why did it take such American valor to win that battle? Because of the opposition, because the Japanese were there to die, and they fought to the death. They fought to their code, an honorable code. In living with my father, I was always told that the heroes of Iwo Jima are the guys who didn't come back. Now, after interviewing hundreds of Iwo Jima veterans, that's exactly how they feel. They saw so many buddies die. They saw the suffering of so many other friends. They can't perceive of themselves as heroes, and I finally understand why they feel that way. I think my father, at the age of 23 years old, just realized he could be this sort of perceived hero all his life, or get on with his life. So he just put it aside and went out trying to be this ordinary American. He never imagined that the photo would stay so famous, so top of mind for the rest of his life. So a prime motivation in writing the book is that these flag raisers were not above and beyond bronzed warriors. They were just ordinary Americans. That's the beauty of the photo to me, that it's ordinary boys just out there doing their duty. And I'm so proud Steven Spielberg purchased the story and that Clint Eastwood brought these 6 guys back to life.
Well, usually my rule is the better the book, the harder it is to do into a screenplay. And this book was terrific. And there were many, many stories in that book and many ways to tell them. So yeah, it was a real challenge because it followed 7 different characters from their childhood in America that's vanished, which was one of the most beautiful things about the book, the stuff before the war, into the war and into this incredible story of what happened to the 3 survivors afterwards. And I was a Marine myself in Vietnam, and the chance to really work with the son of one of the flag raisers, which is like one of the symbolic heroes of the Marine Corps, was really exciting. So I loved James Bradley's book. I loved the chance to work with Steven, and we worked on it almost 2 years through 4 drafts, and it was one of the best experiences I've had. The key for me was I just went to Wisconsin with James Bradley and visited where he'd grown up, because then you could see what a struggle this man, John Bradley, the last surviving flag raiser, had between the horror of Iwo Jima, one of the most brutal, vicious battles in history, surviving that, being held up as a hero, and then coming back and finding this little protected place of normalcy where he could raise his family in the most peaceful, American, classic way. And when you see Wisconsin, and you see Antigua, and the beauty and the simplicity and the peacefulness of the life he created, you realize that this is probably why he survived, was to bring this normal life to his family with all that war that he had carried with him, hidden away. When Clint came on, he had this really great working relationship with Paul Haggis, and Paul came in and did a whole other version, which carries on some of the same storytelling techniques and everything that Steven and I worked out, but also has this wonderful individuality and creativity of Paul himself, and I think fit what Clint wanted to do.
Clint called me up one day. Actually, the first time I spoke with Clint Eastwood, and he said, "Hi, this is Clint." I went, "Yeah, right, it's Clint." It's a cell phone. I couldn't really tell who it was. And he said, "Because I have a book that I'd like you to look at. Can't tell you what it is right now. I got to talk to my partner first." I went, "Okay." So I called over to my agents and said, "Who's Clint Eastwood's partner?" So we asked around town. No one knew. Clint has a partner? No one knew this. So he calls me back a week later and said, "Yeah, so I gave your script of $1 Million Baby to Steven, and he liked it. So let's get together and talk." And I said, "That's great. That's wonderful. Who's Steven?" He said, "Spielberg." I said, "Oh, great. Now, it's bad enough I've been dealing with one icon. Now I'm dealing with 2. So he picks me up and drives me over to the studio to meet with Steven Spielberg. Steven says, "Well, what'd you think of the book?" And I said, it's brilliant. It's great. It's a fabulous book. I think I have about a 10% chance of making it work." Yeah. So we talked for an hour and a half. And then at the end of the conversation, Steven turns to me and says, "So what do you think now?" And I said, I think we had about an 11% chance of making it work. And so, which is my way of pitching, I guess. And so we get up and we leave. And Clint drives me back. And on the way I'm saying, and just as before we get there, I say, "Clint, it's a great book. It's a beautiful book. I have no idea how to make it into a movie. I've never done a war film. I don't know why we should do it. I don't know what, I just don't know how to do it. But if you really, really, really want me to write this thing, I will." And he said, "Okay." I went, "Damn." Tried to get out of it any way I could. One of the problems I knew right off, actually, was that there are a lot of people who have done a lot of research about this battle, and because it was one of the most brutal battles in the Pacific, one of the most brutal battles you've ever fought on both sides. And so I had to be very true to this. So that was a real challenge, because you want people to walk out of the theater and who know something about Iwo Jima and whose dads fought there, who fought them themselves. You know what? The kid got it right. That's what it was like. That's a challenge. I mean, obviously, working with a director like Clint Eastwood and a producer like Steven Spielberg, you know that there's a level of verisimilitude that's going to be there. These guys ain't going to get it right. But they're only going to get it right if the script, tells it right. So that was my job. From the beginning, though, Clint said he didn't want some sort of John Wayne rah-rah, let's go kill some more Asians in a film. That's not what he wanted. That was my mandate, was to tell the truth about what actually happened there, and not really worry about anything else. And so that's the truth from Bradley's perspective, from Clint's, and from mine.
I think there's a chance that my father might have spoken about Iwo Jima if somebody had approached him as an ordinary guy. If someone from the press would have come to him and said, "I'd like to talk about Mike Strang," or "I'd like to talk about the battle," or what it was like being a corpsman. But my father could never talk about Iwo Jima in ordinary terms to the public because they just perceived this bigger-than-life hero. Well, to my father, the flag raising was not an iconic moment. To my father, the heroes of Iwo Jima were these guys that didn't come back, and he was never allowed to pay tribute to them.
I learned so much in researching this film, the sacrifice that was made by these men, about the horrors that occurred on both sides. You learn why young men fight and die, and what makes them get up, stand up when the buddies have been blown in half here, and this fella's just lost his head, then stand up and charge. What kind of men those are. And well, the truth is they're boys. They're 19, 18, 20-year-old boys that do this. And so the courage that they displayed, it was unthinkable.
Walking among us still are these old men that most people think are invisible. That might be going down at the cafeteria at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, eating their carrots and peas. And once when they were young, they were heroes.